and welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm Sam Sorbo. I want to talk about real estate in the United States right now because really the markets are going kind of crazy. And that's because COVID has precipitated an enormous flux, an enormous, what's the word I'm looking for? A current, um, a tide, if you will, almost a tsunami of movement. And this was sort of brought home to me um, just the other day. I was chatting with some friends who live out in California. They had their house on the market a while ago. It didn't sell. They took it off the market. They decided, well, we'll keep it for a while. They have extended family that used the house and stuff like that. It was sort of a secondary home. And then they decided to put it back on the market, and they just got an offer for 25% more than what the home was listed for last, like a year ago or 2 years, maybe more because of COVID, 2 years ago. Okay. Which is crazy because California is losing people. There's a net loss of people in California. And yet here they are. And it looks like they're going to sell their house now. Um, and so I was tooling around on uh, Twitter. Actually, I saw a tweet from somebody, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. And I noticed this guy, Glenn Kelman, who happens to be the CEO of Redfin, and he has a whole Twitter feed about what's happening in the market right now. And I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting, and I'd like to share that with you guys because actually, I have some very good friends who are involved in real estate. So Glenn Kelman is the CEO of Redfin. Redfin is a realty agency. They have realtors. You call them, they'll sell your house for you. And their business plan is to basically completely undercut the rest of the realtor market with much, much lower commission rates. Of course, they promise excellent service and all that other stuff to make them competitive, but they have very low commission rates. He starts with this. He's got a Twitter feed as long as my arm. It's about 15 tweets. It has been hard to convey through anecdotes or data how bizarre the US housing market has become. And then he gives this example. He said in Bethesda, Maryland, there was a home buyer who was working with one of his agents, and somebody included in their offer a pledge to name her firstborn child after the seller. She lost. But still, like, people are making offers in order to stand out because there has been such a tremendous shift. I know in my state of Florida, I have friends who want to move here. And what they're finding is that they have to move so quickly if they want the house. They can't dilly dally because there are 6 offers before sundown, the first day that the house goes on the market. And there are offers even before the house gets on the market if somebody catches wind of it. He also tweeted there are more realtors now than listings. Yeah, we're having there's just less on the market. Inventory is down 37% year over year. It is now at a record low. Inventory means the number of houses that are currently available to purchase. The typical home sells in 17 days, which is also a record low. That's a really fast sale rate. Home prices are up a record amount, 24% over last year, and that is a record high. And still, homes sell on average for 1.7% higher than the asking price, which is also a record. So we're setting all of these real estate records, and I can only think, well, you'll see. I think we'll have a little bit of an answer from some of his later tweets. He said in two of America's largest cities, inventory actually is a net gain. It's increased. What are those 2 cities? New York is up on inventory by 28%. San Francisco's inventory of available housing is up 77%. San Francisco hasn't had an inventory increase this large since 2008 when the big bubble burst. And yet in both markets, he writes prices are increasing. Well, that's not going to last. I mean, if you have supply and demand, if you have too much supply, then the supply is going to lower their prices to meet the demand. If you have more supply than demand, it's going to lower their prices. Okay. In 2020, the new construction permits were down by 13% in DC and New York. They were down 40% in Los Angeles, down 48% in Chicago. They were down by 50% in the Redfin CEO's hometown of Seattle. They were down 79% in San Francisco. Permits were up 25% in Miami, 56% in Vegas, 96% in Greenville, 122% in Detroit, and 246% in Knoxville, Tennessee. But wait for this statistic. Lumber prices are up 300%. I love this guy because he's like just trying to accumulate all of this information, and then you get all this data in and you go, okay, what do I do with it? Well, let's try to figure out what is it saying to us. So in Redfin's annual survey of nearly 2,000 home buyers, 63% reported that they had bid on a home that they never saw in person. Now, I couldn't buy a home. I couldn't do that. I don't know how people buy a home without actually walking through it. Because to me, there's a visceral vibe thing that happens. But when the market is so tight and you don't have a chance, like you just can't get there. And if you're working and you're moving and, I get it, I understand it. But wow. In an April survey of 600 Redfin.com users who had relocated in the past year, he says about 2/3 of the people who moved got a house the same size or bigger. But about the same proportion, 2/3, spent the same or less on housing. So some of them downsized, but some of them upsized and were paying more and were paying less, which is a pretty sort of alarming statistic. It seems like even though home prices are going up, they're actually not downsizing. They're just moving to less expensive housing, which indicates that they're moving out of cities and more into non-city environments, because it's the more congested areas that are higher priced compared to the less congested areas for the same or better housing. Our house here is slightly larger and a lot less expensive than the house in California. So that's me. I'm one of those statistics. He then writes, for low states, 4 people move in for every 1 that leaves. For Texas, the ratio is 5-1. For Florida, 7-1. Again, part of a statistic. Thank you. Cities and states have no leverage to raise taxes after many promised new money for social justice. The federal government will have to fund long-term investments. So that's interesting, that we might be reaching a kind of a government investment bubble. That's interesting. And I've said, here in this state of Florida, we have so many people coming in, the government's going to have to do something to incentivize businesses, I believe. I don't know that that's the right thing to do, but I think if they want to avoid maybe some more critical issues, the government might consider doing something to stimulate or attract businesses. Although I haven't seen the statistic. Maybe there are a bunch of businesses that are also moving to this state. The migration to lower cost areas, he writes, may lead to lower workforce participation. For many families that his company has relocated, the money saved on housing costs lets one parent stop working. And he also said that they have a wave of customers who are retiring early. So that's interesting. And I wonder if you have the opportunity now to work from home. Oh, here's the silver lining. I don't know, maybe if now, because of COVID, we've seen that people can work from home and do well. And so they're saving all that time on the commute, and the companies are saving on office space, and like there's a lot of savings that are happening, both for the worker and for the corporation. But at the same time, if they can now afford for one parent to stay home, maybe that's homeschooling. Maybe they will see that they have an opportunity here to have a better home life, better family life, a more improved, right? Um, and I've had some interesting sort of epiphanies that I'm going to go into in another episode. But there's still a lot to be learned from the ramifications of COVID and on education. And I'm kind of optimistic. I'm very excited about that. Okay, number 12 of 15, lenders are calling employers to confirm that the home buyer will have permission to work remotely when the pandemic ends. So the lender is saying, okay, I see that you have this income and you're moving, but I don't know if your income will, you're telling me your income will continue. I'm going to double check you. Amazing. Rates are lower for loans on primary residences, and the lender also wants to make sure that the borrower actually plans to work after getting the loan. And I have a feeling that that's also incentivized by a government that pays people more to stay home than some of them can earn at the office. Number 13, the average housing budget for out-of-towners moving to Nashville was $720,000, which is 50%, roughly 50% higher than the locals' $458,000 budget. So it used to be, he writes, coastal elites who worried that every adult in the family had to win a career lottery just to afford a home. But now that feeling may spread because of the tremendous wealth that is coming into communities. And that wealth will then raise the prices. That's the big problem. I mean, there are many problems with the fact that the government is paying people on the auspices of COVID, reconciliate COVID remedies, right? The government is paying people so much to stay home. It rivals $15 an hour. And there are a lot of areas in the United States that don't have the $15 an hour, quote, minimum wage. I always like to put minimum wage in air quotes because the minimum wage is zero. That's the minimum wage, unless you pay somebody to work for them. And yet we have this, the progressives are full of all of these sort of, euphemisms, nice words for nasty, nasty things. Minimum wage is a nasty, nasty thing. And yeah, so the minimum wage is being rivaled by or defeated by our very own government. So two things will happen. One, employers will have to raise the wages that they're paying their employees. They'll have to. In fact, Dave Rubin was recently on, and he said that in his town, which he lives somewhere in California, if you go down the main drag, you'll see all of these places that have help wanted signs because they can't find anybody to come to work, especially for the quote unquote minimum wage type jobs, right? So it's not just income that's K-shaped, he writes, but mobility is K-shaped. 90% of people earning $100,000 plus per year expect to be able to work virtually. If you compare that to the 10% of those who are earning $40,000 or less per year, who think that they have mobile capabilities, virtual working capabilities. Well, that's because lower income jobs, menial jobs, tend to be location specific. So if you're a plumber, and I'm not saying that plumbers are, but it's a hands-on job. So you got to live where near your job site. But if you're and actually that's not entirely true. It's just, these are the statistics, right? If you're a receptionist in an office, you can't move. So the lower income jobs tend to be less flexible in terms of mobility and where people can live. He writes, the folks who need low cost housing the most have the least flexibility to move. Well, that's true. And yet, when you put restrictions on housing prices, it's like it's a minimum wage that we call rent control. The cities that implement the strictest rent control standards are the cities with the highest low income house, like the housing for the everyman is skyrocketing because of the pressure that the rent control puts on the market. So it's a disastrous policy, and we ought to be evaluating policies based on their merits, and we don't. Okay, number 15, and then I'll have to close. An investor recently said, with an ancient touch of awe, but also greed, that one source of America's miraculous economic recovery was the bounty of the, quote, land itself. And he writes, we have more room to grow than we ever imagined. We just have to make sure that that benefits everyone. So that seems to be his point of view. I don't know where he stands politically. He is, he lives in Seattle, but he's a businessman and he's in real estate. So I find that hard to believe. I think that he's misinterpreting. I mean, I don't know what the quote was, but the investor who said that it's an amazing thing that our economic recovery is also based on how great the land is that we sit on. And I would argue that that's true. I mean, all of our economics is based on that. So I don't know that you could say that that wouldn't be true. Of course it's true. That said, our economic recovery is really reliant on the capitalist system. And the more that the socialists can impede economic growth, which is all they do, regulations and more regulations, that's what they do. The more they're allowed to impede the economic growth, the longer and harder the recovery will be. And that's basically all I'm going to say about that. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. Check out check out my locals channel, sorbos.locals.com, for more content. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you don't see this on YouTube, then you should go to YouTube, because I put on a nice shirt for you. And I actually did my hair. So you can check it out on YouTube and also Rumble. I do want to encourage people, go over to Rumble, subscribe on Rumble, because I don't know how long YouTube's going to keep me around. They're so woke. All right. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.